Okay, so at this moment, we already know how to get the area of rectangles. It's length times width. When I have a figure that is not it's not a rectangle, but I can make it into rectangles, we can break that area. For example, what I mean with that is, let's take a look at this rectangle here. If you notice, it's a 2 by 5 rectangle. It's 2 squares going one way and 5 squares going the other way. It's a 2 by 5 rectangle. I can count the numbers. I can count the little squares. Or I can just say, well, it's 2 times 5. There should be 10 squares here. I see here at the bottom, there's another rectangle. It's a 2 by 5 rectangle as well. So I'm thinking 2 times 5, that's 10. I can count my squares, but I can just go 2 times 5. And there's a small rectangle here in the center. It's one rectangle going one way. When I measure the length, the width, remember width is the short side. The width is 1 squared. The length is 3 squares. 1 times 3 is 3. Or I can just see there's 3 squares. So I broke my area into rectangles. And the reason why is because I know the area of a rectangle, length times width. So I can just say, well, that one, I can just add the areas. 10 plus 10 plus 3 is 23. That's one way of doing it. Technically, there's a second way of doing it as well. I could have seen this as a big rectangle. Let's say I included the wide side. So if you notice, I have a 5, because this way is 5 squares. And going down, I have, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 squares. So if I had all of it, 5 times 7 gives me 35. So I would have had 35 squares in there. However, let me take away the y part. If you notice, the y part is a 4 by 3 rectangle. So let me subtract 12. That gives me 23. Just wanted to give you guys that heads up in there. You could also do it that way. Now let's take a look at question number 14. Let me stick with the easy one. Let me stick into just make a rectangle. Here, my measurements are 2, because this way I have 2 squares. Going down, I have 5 squares. So 2 times 5, I'm going to say there's 10 squares there. Then I have a small rectangle here. There's 4 squares there. Remember, area technically means how many squares are in there. So I'm just going to add my squares. And then there's 1, 2, 3, and 4. So far I had 10 from the big rectangle, 4 from the small rectangle, and the 4 that I just added. Even then, I still have more squares because I still see more yellow stuff in there. I see that these two yellow triangles, I can put them together. That makes a squared. I can have another square here. I can have another square here. And I have another square here. We're going to have a figure where we have squares that are complete. And we also have squares that are in pieces. In pieces, I was able to make 4 more squares. So all together, just add the numbers. 10 plus 4 plus 4 plus 4. It happens to be, in this case, 22. So there are some figures that I want to make you go back to adding the squares. Now, question number 15. Simple. The length is the long side. I see 5.5 on both sides. However, just because I see a 5.5 on both sides doesn't mean that I have 2 lengths. The length, remember, length is the long side, is 5.5. The short side of a rectangle is 2. So in my calculator, use a calculator if you need to. I'm going to go 5.5 times 2, and that's going to give me 11. The area of this rectangle is 11. Number 16. The long side is 9. So the length is 9. The width is 7. Remember, we tend to call length the long side and width the short side. So I'm just going to go 9 times 7. And I'm just going to say the area of this rectangle is 63. We do have a quiz tomorrow. And I'm going to be covering rectangles, length times width, but I'm also going to be covering questions like number 14, where you're going to be looking at shapes that have white spaces inside, and you're going to have to go and rely, in some cases, rely into counting squares. After all, area means how many squares are in there.